When I blew up the engine in my Honda S600, I wasn't too bummed out about it because there were a few things I didn't care for about that engine, and this gave me the opportunity to buy a better engine. It could be anything. It could be a turbo Hayabusa. It could be an LS7. Could be a turbine engine. Stay tuned to the end of this video to find out that it's just another CBR engine. There were a lot of opinions on what engine I should put into the Honda S600. Some of them were good, some of them not so good. And I'm going to go over them from my least favorite to my favorite. Note here that favorite and good are not the same thing. We'll start off the list with one of the most recommended engines, the Hayabusa. This is not the worst engine this car could have, in fact it's probably one of the best, but this is my least favorite suggestion. Mostly because it's just not very imaginative. The Hayabusa is the LS swap of the motorcycle world. It would, however, be a pretty great engine. It has lots of power, a huge aftermarket for things like dry sumps and turbocharger kits, so I could easily squeeze out a ton of horsepower, but it's just kind of boring, and it's not Honda. And I really think this car should stay powered by Honda, not because it's a Honda car, but because it's Honda's first car. I'm not really a brand guy, but Hondas have treated me well, and it just feels weird to put another brand's powertrain in here. Lots of people thought the BMW engine would go in the S600, and I did consider this for a couple of reasons. It has a little bit more power and it's narrower, so my drive shaft angle would be better. It also weighs a bit less, but again, not Honda. Someone suggested the V-twin from a KTM 1290. This is one of the better suggestions for a non-Honda engine. First of all, I love KTM. I've owned two of them, one of which was destroyed along with my left femur by a teenager in a Ford Mustang. But the 1290 would be great for a few reasons. It has about as much power as the Honda CBR engine, but lots more low-end torque, which would be great since this car is pretty heavy, at least compared to a motorcycle. It comes with a dry sump from the factory, which easily solves my oiling problem, and it's a V-twin, and I love V-twins. They sound so good. In fact, I briefly considered putting an RC51 engine in the S600. This would have been fantastic. A great sound, 10,000 RPMs, low-end power, but they have significantly less power than a modern leader bike, though one of these would be a great swap for a Grom. Several people have suggested an engine from a Honda Goldwing, and I actually considered this when I first did the engine swap. Practically, it's great. It's made for a very heavy motorcycle, so it has lots of torque. There's basically nothing happening in these leader bike engines low in the RPM range. They don't really make power until about 7,000 RPMs, so it's hard to launch, and when I'm driving around a neighborhood at 20 miles per hour, it kind of sounds like an IndyCar race is going on. But I digress. The Goldwing. Another benefit of these engines is the fact that they come with reverse. They just spin the starter motor through a gear that turns the back tire in reverse, but I don't need reverse. I've already solved that problem. And yes, I do have to rev the engine high to get the car to move, but one of my favorite things about this car is the high revs. I have a car that redlines at 12,500 RPMs. It's just awesome, and I love it. And I'm not going to go to an engine that redlines at half of that. Several people recommended the Honda K20. This is an excellent suggestion for a few reasons. One is that this is a legendary Honda engine, super reliable and able to be jacked up to tons of power. I also like this suggestion because it's kind of ridiculous. This engine would be comically big for this car, and even mild tuning would give it more power than it would really need. But it's going to make the car weigh enough that it'll lose that go-kart feel. It doesn't have the high revs, and I lose the sequential shifting unless I want to spend big money for a racing transmission, which I do not. The new Honda CBR1000RR-RR, the Fireblade. I really wanted this engine, but I couldn't just buy the engine. I'd have to buy the whole bike, and the whole bike is about $30,000. I even asked a couple of friends who work at Honda to ask around about possibly selling me just an engine, but no luck. Unfortunately, there's not a ton of them on eBay from wrecked motorcycles. I did find a couple of wrecked bikes, but they still wanted over 20 grand for them, and that's just way outside of my budget. I actually also wanted to use this engine in my land speed car, but again, it's just too expensive. So this marks the first time in history someone has said, I really wanted to go with Honda, but I couldn't afford it, so I got a BMW instead. Anyway, I didn't go with this engine, though if you work at Honda and you can maybe make one fall off the back of a truck and land in my garage, call me. Honda CBX Inline 6. If you're not familiar with the CBX 1000, it is an inline 6-cylinder motorcycle that Honda made about 40 years ago. It makes one of the best sounds of any motorcycle ever made. It's not a V6 or an opposed 6, but an inline 6, and the cylinders are arranged like an inline 4. This is done for cooling. The engine is air-cooled, and it needs all that airflow to the cylinders and exhaust headers. Air-cooled would be a really bad choice for this car engine, and it makes almost half the power of a modern 1000, so this scores pretty low on the practicality scale. Really high on the cool scale, but another drawback is that these motorcycles are somewhat rare, and I wouldn't want to take one of them off the road just to have a neat engine for my car. So what engine did I go with? Well, I went with the same one that I had in it before, just a newer version. I originally had a 2006 CBR1000RR. The car will very soon have a 2017 CBR1000RR. It would have been really easy just to get another 2006. It would have just dropped right in, but that engine had a few things I didn't like about it. For one, it's low on power. Honda hasn't been great with the horsepower game in their sport bikes, but 2006 and 2007 were particularly bad. The CBRs ran clutch cables until 2006 when they switched to hydraulic clutches. This was one of my big complaints about the old engine. The clutch was really grabby, so I couldn't rev over about 6,500 RPMs while letting out the clutch, or it would grab and almost stall. As I said before, it doesn't really make power until 7,000, so this is no good. It wasn't just me, this was noted by some people on the sport bike forums. Fat guys on their 2006 and 2007 CBR 1000s had trouble launching the bike, and with my CBR engine shoved into a car, I'm basically a really fat guy on a motorcycle. Honda switched back to a clutch cable in 2008 and have gone with that ever since, at least up until 2017 anyway. So I have to redo my clutch handle, which is a bummer because this thing is so cool looking. I'll probably go vertical with it so I can just have the cable go out the bottom. I originally had the hydraulic clutch handle vertical, but I had problems getting air in the line, so I switched it. Anyway, this should be pretty straightforward. The sequential shifter with the hand clutch is perhaps my second favorite thing about this car, the first being the incredibly high RPM redline, and with the new engine, that gets even better, spinning up to 13,000 RPMs, and that just makes me so happy. I think I got lucky with the mounting points. The new engine removes 2 mounts altogether, but those were the 2 that I wasn't using. The other 4 mounts seem to be in the same locations. The fronts are a little bit wider, but it's only a smidge, so I think I can bend one of the mounts out of the way. The rear lower mount is narrower, but I can just add a spacer there. The driveshaft output, or sprocket as it's sometimes called, is in a slightly different spot, so my driveshaft extension doesn't work, so I'll need to make a new adapter and get my driveshaft lengthened. I didn't get the new throttle bodies for the new engine. I'm hoping the old ones fit so I can just carry over the whole intake assembly. Also, it would be pretty great if the intake ended up in the same spot as before, so I don't have to do more delicate hood modifications. The exhaust ports are different on this new engine as well. The old headers had this funky looking cast piece, but the new ones are just some simple round bits. They must have done a cost down on this. Anyway, I bought a new header and chopped off the ends so I could weld them to my old car header. This will presumably put the outlet in roughly the same location as before. I'm not going to do any internal modifications except for the camshaft sensor, which needs to be slightly chopped up to work with my new ECU. I'm not sure if the crankshaft sensor is the same as the old one or has the same signal spacing. I might just put it together, crank it over, and see what happens. I can always hit it with a timing light. It's kind of a pain in the ass to get the timing right on these things since the sensor is attached to the side cover, which you have to remove to see the timing wheel. The shifter was set up on a bell crank that attached to the top motor mount. This new motor doesn't have this mount, so I'll need to find a way to transmit the shifting from my hand to the actual shift lever. I don't really want to go with a push-pull cable because that softens the feel. I like the direct shifting feel from the linkage. You can feel the cogs engaging in the transmission. It's so visceral. I love it. So I have to do all that stuff. I also need to fix the issue that got me into this mess, the fact that my oil sloshes away from the pickup in sustained high G corners. I mentioned previously that I was considering designing and building my own dry sump system. I have an idea for a 3-stage pump installed inside the oil pan that uses stock CBR oil pumps. The other alternative is to just give daily engineering a few $100s and move on with my life. Which path did I choose? Tune in next time to find out. It used to be that you had to impress people to get people to watch your show. Now you just have to impress the algorithm. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. All hail the algorithm.